What's the origin of a stripy barbershop pole?
And what does the iconic I'm Spartacus scene from the 1960 film have to do with communism?
And did you know that the most interesting Acme whistle was not actually a whistle at all? Hello and welcome to REMORANDOM, a celebration of everything interesting. I'm Remo Giuffré.
And I'm Claudia Chan Shaw.
Okay, so we finally got there, Claudia. We're episode 1 of REMORANDOM. We've been talking about it for a while. Companion
We have.
podcast to the book series.
Look, I just happen to have one here. For those watching at home, this is what it looks like. This is what we're talking about. Little snippets.
That's the orange one for those that can see that or can't see that, which is number 2. So let me just give you a little bit of a backstory there. REMORANDOM is this, biannual printed book series. Comes out every 6 months. I send it to subscribers, and it's a curated and radically random, I would say, mix, drawing from a whole diverse range of topics: culture, design, history, nature, ideas, people, science and things. The idea is that it's, inspiring, curious minds. Every chapter just lives on a single double-page spread, so suits all attention spans, I like to say, Claudia.
Yeah, you can dip in and out. It's look, see? Easy.
See that
words and pictures.
Listeners, that is a spread to do with Marilyn Monroe's billowing address standing on the subway. So where did REMORANDOM come from? Well, we kind of have to wind back to 1988 when I had a store in Sydney called the Remo General Store. And it was, I had been trained as a lawyer and had recently returned from the US, and I had no background in retail. So this was all a bit of an experiment. None of us really knew what we were doing, but it was a lot of fun. And it was a curation, not of interestingness, which is what REMORANDOM is now, but of actual things. The catalogues became very well known and ended up being sent all over the world and generating a whole bunch of heat, which was fun. But at the end of the day, the only way to pay the bills was to sell stuff from the catalogues. Anyway, in this post-consumer world, it just seemed to me time to bring the spirit of that brand back, rebooted somewhat as a storytelling brand, because storytelling has already been in the DNA of the brand. Claudia, you would remember Remo from those days.
I do. The Remo General Store was on Oxford Street, on the corner of Crown and Oxford, wasn't it? And it was on the beautiful big store, great window displays. And the cool thing was there was a photo booth outside the store. And in my hallway, like 30 odd years later, I still have photographs of my husband and I on the wall clowning around in your photo booth. And I still have some of the T-shirts I bought from the Remo General Store, including my Cole Porter one with the lyrics of "You're the Top." You're the top. Da, da, da,
You're
da,
the
da,
top.
da.
That's great.
Best
Yeah,
store.
no, I know. Well, it's always maybe 2 or 3 times a week someone will meet me, and usually the reaction is, "Oh, you're that Remo." That Remo
Yeah.
from. I mean, especially if they're from Sydney. Anyway. Long story short, I kind of went off and did some other things, including bringing the TED franchise to Sydney with TEDx Sydney, and did that for 14 years. I'm
Golly,
still
that long.
involved, but no, kind of back to my first baby, and really excited about REMORANDOM involving readers. So that's my story in a nutshell, Claudia, and lots more will leak out over the ensuing weeks. But I've been kind of aware of you for a long time. You pop up on the telly and on radio, but I really don't know the full, backstory. So what's the elevator pitch?
Okay, so it's the quick elevator pitch is I wear a lot of creative hats. So in the creative space. So when I have to write "What's your occupation" on a form, I usually say designer, because that's where my world began.
That's at the airport on that form
That's right.
thing. Yeah, right.
That's right. I'm leaving town. What is your occupation? I'm a designer. Because you can't say I'm a slashy. I do all these things. But I do all these things. So I started out as a fashion designer. We were in the Queen Victoria building with the Vivian Chan Shaw label for 28 years. And fashion business has been in the family for 50 odd years. And I'm a curator. I'm a visual artist. And if during the Lunar New Year over the last few years you're wandering around town, you might have seen my very large artworks, public art installations, including 14 3-metre high rabbits with silk waistcoats on, illuminated giant lantern rabbits
Well, wait a minute.
outside Customs House.
Is that behind you? Is there one of those behind you from where you're sitting at the moment? Because I see whiskers
Yes.
and I see a face, but I thought it was a cat and not a rabbit. But maybe it's a.
So I'm a visual artist.
You're all over the place.
TV and radio presenter. So I present Arts Friday on Eastside Radio, so always to do with the arts. I'm a presenter and producer of Antiques Down Under on telly on 9Gem. And the TV career grew out of collecting because I'm a nutty collector. This is not a serious
I'm
household.
learning this about you, and I'm really excited about figuring out all the other things you're obsessed with, because I gather that there are quite a few things. But
I have a lot
the
of
radio,
obsessions.
but that arts program, that's kind of how this came about, because you interviewed me
Yes.
when the first book came out. And then when the second book came out, I remember you contacted me and said, why don't you just come in for the whole 90 minutes of my show and we can just, riff off each
Have
other.
a rave. Absolutely.
And have a rave. And that was so much fun. And so when I was cycling back to this idea of, a companion podcast, I thought, wouldn't it be fun to do that with someone? I wouldn't be nearly as lonely. It would be much more fun. And, and that program was really great. So here we are. And
that was
a few months later.
the birth of the podcast. So your podcast partner in crime, Remo, is not a terribly serious person, which is good. I collect tin toys and robots. So, I'm not going to be a stiff upper lip to the letter girl. And I've written a book on collecting called Collectomania. And you've already got 3 books. I've only got 1 book. So I better get to work.
Yeah, you got to catch up.
I got to catch up.
Anyway, let's maybe we should just get into it and just talk about a few of the topics that are covered in the books that have already been printed and are available online at REMORANDOM.com. And the first one I wanted to chat to you about was the Barber Pole, which is kind of relevant because I get my hair cut once every 2 weeks. I just like having my hair short. It grows very, very quickly. I'm like the
Really?
opposite of Samson. I feel stronger when my hair is, I think the setting, the barber, it's like 0 or 1/2 or something. I'm in and out like a thief in the night. Doesn't take long. It's every 2 weeks, and it's Frankie Nasso, who I kind of know through a family connection. It's here in North Bondi where I live. It's literally across the road. If he gets a gap in his schedule, he texts me and he says, "Ready, mate." And I go across the road, and I'm back at my computer 15 minutes later. Anyway, on one of those occasions, I was there and I said, "Frankie, I gave you a copy of that book and you took it home to the family. What do you reckon?" And he said, "Mate, I love it. And, my 11-year-old daughter takes it to bed and she's never been a reader before. Or she is a reader and this has obsessed her." But I said, Frankie, a lot of those ideas didn't come out of my head. They sort of just came across, my desk or got mentioned to me at the sauna at the Bondi Icebergs. Like, for example, there is something interesting that you can tell me about that I can then research and write about for our readers. What can we talk about? And then, without skipping a beat, he said, "Oh, mate, the barber pole." So, the barbering is a really, really old profession. It dates back to the ancient Egyptians, Greeks, Romans. But in those days, barbers did more than, just cut hair. They did various, minor-ish medical procedures, all because they were good with a blade. One thing that they did, which has since been kind of discredited as completely useless, was bloodletting. And the way that, taking bad blood out of you to get you, fix you up. And
Irrigation.
yeah, exactly. And in medieval Europe, the way it would work is that someone would go in there and there would be this pole put in front of them, which had two dishes, one at the bottom and one at the top. The dish at the bottom was to collect the blood. The pole was for people to hang on to as their veins were being opened. And the dish at the top held leeches, which would assist in the blood flow. So it was a pretty gruesome bloody thing. But and to advertise the fact that they did this service, these barbers would have the pole outside their place of business, and they would drape the blood-soaked bandages on the pole.
Charming. Beautiful.
Yes. So from a distance, you got this kind of red and white blood-soaked bandages on a pole, which would go, oh, there's a barber. I could really use some tooth extraction or bloodletting, so forth. So that was the origin of the red and white. But then barbers merged with surgeons in 1540, and their colour was blue, so they created this kind of blue and red stripe combo. But then fast forward to 1745, and the Royal College of Surgeons breaks away, says we don't want either of those colours anymore. You can have them, and so that's why the barb. You can have the blue, no charge. So that's that's why we've got those red and blue barber poles, typically, rotating. The good ones, the beautiful ones, come from a company in St. Paul, Minnesota called the William Marvey Company. They made the one that's in the White House, apparently.
Oh, really?
Anyway,
there's a barber
yes.
in the White House.
Yeah, there's a bowling ring, there's a barber. You can have whatever you want to eat anytime. Anyway, there's not as many out there. I mean, William Marvey used to sell 5,000 of them a year, and now they're down to 500. But it's one of those things that, the whole idea is that it
comes from this gruesome past.
I know. So that's that.
That's the barber
Yeah.
pole. I've always wanted a barber pole. I've always wanted one. I can put it outside the house with it because I've got a 3-meter rat in the lounge room, so why not? Always wanted a barber pole. Always wanted a laughing clown. Always wanted a carousel horse. Do you think you can arrange a barber pole for me now that you know all about them?
Can it be like teeny weeny barber pole? Is that okay?
No. Full size. Full size. I need the whole thing. Always wanted one. Hair is very important. I'm very, very thingy about my hair.
I know. Well, we're gonna do a whole episode on your hair one day. But so we're going to cover a few topics per episode. And why don't you kick us off with the next one?
Oh, I want to tell you about this. Now, do you know the film Spartacus?
Yes, I do.
Yes, you do, of course. It's the era of the sword and sandal film. So, you've got, it's 1960 that it came out. Before that was Ben-Hur the year before. And a bit before that was the Ten Commandments. So we love all this sword and sandal stuff. So 1960, young Stanley Kubrick comes along and he directs this film called Spartacus. And interestingly, the only film where he didn't have full creative control. So there was no weirdness going on in Spartacus. And Spartacus is a slave who leads a rebellion against the nasty Romans.
And that's Kirk Douglas, played by Kirk Douglas, right?
Yeah. He of the deep dimple. Kirk Douglas.
Dimple. Amazing dimple.
What a hero. What a hero. And so the scene builds, and Spartacus has developed himself as a bit of a hero. And there's a big scene, the climax of the film, where Crassus, the mean Roman, comes along, and all the slaves are lined up, sitting there, and identify Spartacus. Tell me who Spartacus is, and all of you other people will have your lives spared. And so Spartacus is about to get up and fess up and say who he is. And then his comrades, one by one, stand up and say, I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. It's a fantastic scene. And Kirk Douglas, who's playing Spartacus, is looking at all of his comrades standing there proclaiming that they're Spartacus. He's got a tear in his eye. He's crying. It's a very, very moving scene. So what
Well,
it
you
means
don't
is they
get
all
that
get
loyalty.
crucified.
Yeah, yeah.
No, you don't. And so they all get crucified. Now, the interesting thing is, while this is the big sword and sandals epic, and it tells the story of Spartacus, who was a real person, it also references the McCarthy era. We know when they were looking for the communists that were hiding under the bed and the naming of names. And the fellow who was the author of the original novel of Spartacus was Howard Fast. And he was thrown into prison because they thought he was a communist. And the screenwriter of Spartacus, Dalton Trumbo, who was one of the so-called Hollywood 10, was jailed for contempt of the Congress in 1950. So all of these fantastic, talented people are being outed as commies. And so they had to, if they wanted to do any work under assumed names. So they're blacklisted. Until about 1960, which is when the film came out, Kirk Douglas publicly acknowledges that Dalton Trumbo was the screenwriter. And he also wrote Exodus in 1960. And so there you go. It's out. We know who the screenwriter is. And at the time, even Kennedy could realize that this witch hunt was ridiculous. And so he crossed the picket line that was outside the film's premiere, and he went in and watched the film. And that pretty much was the end of the McCarthy era for the poor people in Hollywood. But the cute thing is, there are all these wonderful backstories. The scenes where, I'm Spartacus, and a whole crowd going, "Hail Crassus," who was played by Laurence Olivier. 76,000 spectators in a stadium at Michigan State versus Notre Dame College were recorded by Stanley Kubrick saying, "Hail Crassus," and "I'm Spartacus."
I love that. I love that.
Big
Oh my
voices.
God.
Big
I love
voices. How's that?
Oh,
So that
that's
was a real
great.
crowd scene.
I love that story. I love that story.
So these
and-
days we would fake that.
Yeah, who needs that fake stuff?
Hey, do you remember the scene in Spartacus where Tony Curtis, who's also a slave, Antonidas, is giving a sponge bath to Laurence Olivier as Crassus? Do you remember that scene?
I filter out all the homoerotic stuff.
It's so
in
cute,
those
though.
movies.
He's giving him a sponge bath, and Laurence Olivier says to Tony Curtis, "Do you eat oysters? Do you eat snails? My taste includes both snails and oysters."
Get it?
So good. And it's shot through a dark, gauzy curtain. Best scene. Great film. Watch Spartacus tonight.
I'm going to do that.
I had a dog called Spartacus.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
that true?
It's true. My last late dog was called Spartacus, and he had on his collar, "I'm Spartacus." True.
That beats me because our first pet when I lived in Kensington was a cat. His name was Oedipus Rex, but I think yours is better because it integrates there with the branding around the neck. But look,
Yeah.
one last thing. I think we've got time because it is kind of my favourite story, just about chapter from the second volume of Memorandum, and it relates to Acme whistles, which we used to sell when I had the store in Darlinghurst. I love Acme, the Thunderer, the Metropolitan whistle. All these old whistles come from the Acme Whistle Company and J. Hudson and Co. from Birmingham in England. So in 1883, Hudson entered this competition from the police force to come up with a better whistle, because at the time the London Metropolitan Police Force, the way that they used to chase after baddies is that they had these wooden clackers, like those things that spin around. They didn't travel. Stop or I'll amuse you. Anyway, the whistle that he came up with was amazing. It had this little cork pea inside it, gave it an ear-splitting rattle that could travel up to 2 miles, and they still use them in the police force there. And the Thunderer is that kind of classic referee whistle that is still the world's best-selling whistle. So whistles are us, but actually the most interesting Acme whistle was not a whistle at all.
Oh, yeah. What was it?
I learnt this when I was researching for this chapter, and It's about D-Day, and it's about the Allied forces, planning this like surprise landing. Paratroopers needed a way to communicate with the Allied forces behind enemy lines that, I'm a friend and not a foe. So Hudson was commissioned to manufacture 7,000 of these things, little brass clickers, based on, the toys.
Is it like a party clicker?
Yeah, party clicker. But this was like very kind of sleek brass. What was it called? The number 470 clicker. And so the message was the paratrooper would go click clack, and in return, a friend would go click clack twice, and that meant okay. And so it was great. Sadly, this strategy only lasted 24 hours because after some soldiers got captured, the enemy got the clickers. So it was really short-lived, but it was long enough. And Hudson weren't allowed to keep even one of these from their production in the fear that it would leak out.
It's top secret.
Yes, top secret. So they didn't actually even have one, and they to commemorate the 75th anniversary of D-Day in 2019, they promoted this like search for the lost clickers of D-Day, and someone who turned out to kind of live around the corner had one, and everyone lived happily ever after. But
everyone rejoiced.
That clicker does appear in the John Wayne film, 1962 film, The Longest Day. So I'm not making this up. It is true.
Yep.
And
I love that. I love that they're by Acme. It's so Bugs Bunny, isn't it? Where everything is Acme.
I know that makes me the coyote and you the roadrunner. In this podcast, if we're going to
all right, if we
take characters and pick sides,
I'd rather be Daffy Duck.
Don't drop a giant boulder on my head. Anyway, look, that might be all for this episode of REMORANDOM. As mentioned, you can order copies of our books at REMORANDOM.com and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcast.
Yeah, and you can tell us what you think by joining the global community of the curious, because Remo and I are very curious. You can go online at REMO Since 1988.
Or REMORANDOM.com, that's the new one. REMORANDOM.com, That'll take you there.
That's even better. That's great.
So, thanks so much, Claudia. Looking forward to seeing you next week. Have a good time. Congratulations on your backdrop, the giant rat backdrop, and we'll see you then.
I'll see if I can throw up a new one for next week, but I don't know that if I can build something in time. It's been fun, Remo. Thank you.
Pleasure. Next time you see me, I'll have had a haircut. Bye-bye.